All right, next item on the agenda is athletic summary, pay to play.
You were provided with some supplemental information on the recommendation page. You'll see that I broke out a cost analysis, option A, B, C, and D, and then Dr. Keene asked that also an additional recommendation be considered that he's proposing. Number of athletes is in the left part where it says participation, and then obviously the pay. We've discussed this for the last 2 or 3 months. We've also had some thorough discussions last year. Based on the administration's review of the data we provided, we think the board should consider one of 2 options. This is the administration's recommendation. I know Dr. Keene wanted to provide an additional argument. We think the board would, because a decision does need to be made tonight, because residency does start July 22nd, and we do need to start putting this information out for families. Either leave, one choice the administration's recommending is just leave it at $200 per sport for another school year. However, if the board can come to an agreement, or a majority of the board can come to an agreement on some reduction of revenue, then the administration would recommend option C. It's slightly higher than option B there. But the purpose of that would be a true tiered system of 200, 150, and 100. And on the page to follow, 2 pages back, Mary Ann, if you can go, or 3 pages back.
What page?
I'm sorry, that is page 102. The cost breakdown per sport, including gate workers and those things, were broken out. I know Mr. Walsh did some additional analysis, but even if you looked at his analysis, unless you started to prorate, including the cost of the athletic director in there, the numbers were coming up pretty close to the same, which showed that some of the sports that we thought per athlete would be relatively cheaper, like cross country, or even the basketball and volleyball, were coming up at a lot significantly higher compared to a football. So that was the recommendation. The board had asked to see some additional cost on those as well. So we were able to break that down.
So John, you want to talk about your recommendation, which you sent?
Well, that came from one of the previous meetings, as one of the proposals that had been discussed, the 200, 150. So I'm basically lifting it from that. The other proposal, Kevin, the 475 cap, were you able to do any analysis on that? Or?
Tim, you were able to speak to that a little bit, correct? We went through like 4 letters.
We went through the students' last names A through D. It's very difficult to start tying families together, because a lot of families have different last names. A lot of students have different last names, of the same part of the family, and they may even be, in one family but live at 2 different addresses. So it takes a considerable amount of time, and it is very difficult. I think in terms of looking at that, it really is. If we look at the 32 students that were in 3 sports, they were paying $600 for those sports. If we just look at the sports aspect of it, if they were paying $475 instead, it would be a loss of about $4,000. So I don't know.
Or did you have some didn't you have a few numbers on the 4 letters that you did search? Percentage of how many students? Did you bring that with you?
Yeah, well, the one, we're really looking at the students who participated in 3 sports. 80% of them paid between $500 and $800 for all of their activities. That's what you're talking about. 20% of those 32, or actually 15 students that we were able to identify, paid over $1,000, 20% of them.
Per student?
So
or per
3
family?
students,
Per family or per student?
per family.
Okay, any other comments on this?
Dr. Keene did ask that we provide those comparables that we provided last March. I did dump those in the packet on Monday. You'll see the updated memo. There was, out of the several schools that Art was able to pull from last year, only one out of all those listed do have a family cap. The others, there was 5 or 6 schools that do it, basically a 2-sport cap, is what it looked like. But again, from what we're seeing, I would just say to the board, either we go another year at 200, or if the board's willing to sacrifice the 15,000, maybe implement the tier system of 200, 150, 100. Dr. Keene's recommendation, which was one of the other ones of 200, 150, that would be a reduction of about $30,000 in revenue. I would open it then to the board.
Any other discussion?
So I'm trying to understand why we're talking about altering this and how that mirrors up to our stated goal.
I think you need to ask that question to the board.
Right, that's what I'm asking that to the board. If the goal is to get 100% participation of all students, and we're focusing in on those students who are participating in 3 sports, that doesn't achieve that goal. So I'm trying to, we keep coming back to this, and we're spending a lot of time on it. So I just trying to understand why we're talking about this.
So why don't we, I'd like to address that, but here's my proposal. I'd like to vote on the Keene rec and see what happens there. If that fails, I'd like to vote on the family cap proposal at 475.
Why don't we go with option A first, and then
Okay,
that
then we can have a
fails?
discussion, yeah. So I propose the Keene recommendation proposal, and I ask for a second.
Well, I'll second it, John.
Okay.
If, I wanted to say before you did that,
Well, we discuss now, maybe.
the option C, I mean, we have 2 moving parts here. We have athletics and we have activities. So the family cap option you're gonna bring up, I need to, is that for both or for athletics?
It's for both.
Okay, because I don't see that we're, I don't see that we're going to do anything with the activities on tonight's agenda.
Right, the board and the administration recommended to the board, and the board at that time was in agreement a few months back that we would go another year with the activities.
Okay.
Current scale and process, because it was only the first year we did it. We're not sure if we're able to track it accordingly. So we wanted to go at least 2 years with the pay to participate.
Well, I think we need to focus in on Keene's, because I was going to bring up the whole idea about family cap, and you then have to bring that across the board. So I think we need to focus on Keene's, which has nothing to do with family caps at this point.
All right, so make your motion following the resolution there,
Well, he can
which
make
is
a
on the
motion.
bottom of page 98.
Well, hold on, there's a motion and it's been seconded.
Okay.
So.
But, again, for the discussion purposes, you know, Gary's point, and he said the same thing last time, has some merit. It's a goal, but if our goal for, you know, PSAC or ACT, whatever different scores we have on the goals that have to pull them out for English is such and such a number, if Pam was making a proposal that we could do this and it could go better, I would think we would weigh the benefit of spending a little more money or doing something different to actually do better. So the goal of having everybody participate in one activity, although a good goal, is somewhat of a minimal goal too. If you listen to what our administration told us, you read some articles that students who involve students do better. And most, you know, you could read plenty of reports that say students who are, whatever their activity is, whether it's music, art, sports, but it's mostly done with sports because of the season, they tend to do better in the seasons where they're in a sport. And the same students tend to slack off a little in the seasons they're not a sport. So, you know, to have an additional incentive for, I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I think there's some merit to it, whether we have a specific goal for that. But, you know, I got to tell you, John, you know, after looking at the numbers, if you look at, I think it's on 108 on mine, I never bring up the revised one, but you know, we were thinking in terms of cross-country, it actually is, at the, more than the top, in the top half of the cost of sports, where I, in my gut, would have thought it was at the bottom. But part of it is because it's done on a net cost basis. If there were, 20 more kids in it, it would also drop the cost per student down, and that was part of your economical point there, that if we had 20 more students, we don't have to pay for another coach probably. So there's not an additional margin, there's not additional cost, variable cost to us to do it, so. But I'm just, the only thing is, there's very little difference in some of the proposals that Kevin, Dr. Skinkis made on here, and, I'd just like to see, after seeing the numbers, do you still feel strongly about both, that reducing on each sport is important and have a family cap?
Well, they obviously are related, and one adds a little different wrinkle, but I just want to thank you for all your work you did on that analysis, the spreadsheet. I mean, part of the problem with cost allocation is we're not allocating fixed costs to this.
Right.
The pool, the football stadium, all that. I mean, you can get in all kinds of arguments about what's valid and what's not. So if we just sort of stick with the variable cost, we stick with it. I mean, I think there's three main points about sports participation, and I'm speaking as a former, varsity athlete, multi-sport athlete here. I mean, I think Gary's right. We have this goal of participation, but I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think we want to encourage individuals to excel in multiple sports or participate in multiple sports, and we want everyone to try to participate in at least one sport. That being said, that there's benefits to that, and I can speak to that personally. Second component, speaking as a physician, is we have a health and fitness problem in this society. We should be encouraging our students to, participate in as many, quote, lifetime sports as possible. This would include running, swimming, even golf, to encourage people to exercise. So there's long-term external benefits to us to encourage participation. The third is the equity component, and this sort of addresses the family cap. Basically, these fees are subsidizing our athletic department, and it was reasonable to impose them. But I think when you start getting into three-sport athletes, parents, especially in my town of Brookfield, $600 is a lot of money to these people, to my constituents, okay? It's a lot of money to me, and I make a good salary. I think it's time that we sort of look at this equity component of what's reasonable for any family to subsidize our athletic program. So either this proposal here, I think, addresses that, or if we do a family cap, would be another way to do it. So that's why I'd encourage you to vote yes on my proposal.
Any other comments on this?
Yeah, I'm struggling with this because it's, to me, kind of a shot in the dark, because we don't have a lot of data. We can change these numbers and see participation go down across the board. I mean, I just don't know, John, so I'm struggling with it. I really appreciate what Tim and you have done with respect to the analysis you put forth. But I think, whatever we do here, it's a bit of a shot in the dark as to what we're actually going to accomplish.
I think John has brought up an interesting component. We haven't talked about it, but because he's a physician, all the major medical societies are talking about obesity. The CDC has a major campaign. The American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons has a major campaign. It's a greater philosophical question also. We're a public school. We have the ability to offer opportunity to encourage students to learn how to run for life, to swim for life. We as 7 board members can look at that as an opportunity to be part of students' lives, to train them to be physically fit people. The YMCA does that. Different health clubs say that healthy people do that. The Obamacare law is going to incentivize people to maintain their healthy behaviors. Different insurance companies, Henry Ford in Michigan, now if you're an employee, you get discounts in your insurance if your blood pressure is within certain rates. This is our new world, so we're kind of on cutting edge and very progressive to look at funding sports in relationship to healthy living, healthy lifestyle. And coming from Harvard, you'd appreciate that too, that progressive looking at it more than just playing sports, but adopting a philosophy of life, staying fit, staying out of the doctor's office. So that this whole conversation can change from that. And we may want to start to look at what's a family cap, but what can we do as 7 people to create the philosophy that we want you to live fit for the rest of your life. So I just want to put that out in support for John's.
Laura, the athlete who's in 2 sports is not fit, and he needs to have a 3rd sport?
Well, what about a family who has 2 kids? I had 2 kids here, Tim had 2 kids here. If they were each in 2 sports, that would have been $800. So plausibly, a family cap would have helped me greatly. And that's what we're talking
Okay,
about.
well, we're not on that one.
We're not on that one yet, but when we talk about.
Let's do the John, let's vote on John Keane, and we want to talk family cap, then let's talk.
Right, but
family
when
cap.
we're talking about why are we discussing this, we've got to get away from just the numbers, away from the goal, but the greater philosophical question, the reason why we're board members. Because we could be progressive, we can be progressive thinkers about our curriculum, we can be progressive thinkers about training our young people on the lives that they can live. This is our health care coming down, this is our country, all medical societies are pushing for this. It's not just about numbers or sports.
Right, but
It's
we
bigger
don't
than that.
have, we never did get an answer on why the participation is down. All of a sudden now, we are squashing a bug because we think it's just strictly the dollars. We don't know if it was a change of coach. We don't know what the rationale was, why. All we know is we're assuming it's cost, but we haven't got any data that said it's, and again, we're altering something here because we saw the 3rd sport athlete participation is down. We
Well,
don't know why.
True, and we should encourage
And
our
we're not,
administration.
and if you look at the overall participation,
Right.
it's not like it's gone from 1,100 down to 200. Okay, there's a significant number of athletes still participating. We don't know why it's down. There's an assumption made, and we're assuming, and we're making decisions on assumptions, and you know what that causes. Again, we should be focused in on the true. So if we want to talk family cap, let's first take this proposal, vote on it, and then there can be a second proposal brought up that there should be a family cap. All I would encourage, if you're talking family cap, then we need to expand this to not only include sports, because we're focused here only on sports.
Right.
And we then need to assess the economic impact when we're talking about participation fees for being the chess club. And what impact will that have? And that's a pretty broad analysis that we need to do. So let's vote on this one, and then we can talk about
Well,
a
the
family.
only problem is he presented is, I'd like you to vote on this, and if you don't, I'd like you to consider the
Right,
other
that'd
one.
be the second one.
Yeah, so in my mind, the discussion of family cap is somewhat relevant to this vote. And I'd like to just ask
I
one
don't think
question.
they're interrelated, though.
Well,
Well,
the
so
way
here's
he,
what I'm asking you to do is restate your motion to go with the Keene recommendation on that, and then we can take, if that, you know what I mean? If that doesn't go, then we talk about family cap. Is that all right with you?
Well,
He only did
that's
the
what's
one,
on the
right?
motion. I mean, that's on the table now.
He basically said.
Just
No,
call
but
the
it's-
question,
Tim's
Matt.
saying right now that Tim's saying that you said both. What I'd like you to do is clarify your motion.
The motion is the first Keene rec,
Okay,
but I'm just giving like,
all right. So you agree with that? too?
Heads
That's what
up.
you're going for?
I think, yes, we're just voting on this last column on page,
All right, so any more dialogue on the Keene rec?
yeah. I think $200 a sport compared to youth sport coming into high school is an economical bargain for a sport. It does supplement the costs of providing that sport. It doesn't pay for that overall. Because overall, the budget in the athletic we're paying out. Compared to option C, it's $100 difference if I can do my math without my glasses here.
Yes.
Basically, the other option would be $100 difference. I would tend to lean more towards that. I think we need to get data, and we need to have it somewhat consistent so that we can try to see if the money is the factor causing the fluctuation in participation. When I looked at the cost per athlete, I was kind of before I even saw the cost, I knew certain sports had transportation costs for both home and away type things, and I figured it just wasn't a pair of swim trunks or a pair of running shoes or a pair of basketball shorts that were driving the cost there. I think it's a, you know, I'm not sure I'm gonna vote for that, but
Okay.
those would be my thoughts on that.
All right,
Well,
any
the
more
other-
on the Keene recommendation?
Yes, the other, you know, and John's talked about it, Gary, you've talked about it, and other concepts. You know, if you take the most economical sports we have, and again, looking at it, not fixed costs or the administrative costs, because how are you gonna do it? Some of the sports cost less than what we charge the student for. Girls water polo comes to $134 a kid, and they have to pay $200. And then you go to some of the, you know, expensive sports. When you said it's cheap, you know, it's not a lot of money. You know, girls basketball costs $900 a person. So you also have the fact that in some, you know, in essence, certain sports are subsidizing other sports when you're looking at a budget overall. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can slice and dice it, and, you know, we're trying to look for something that's equitable. And I think that's what John's main concern is what's the most equitable way to do it, right, John?
Okay, anything else?
And then I agree with John that, and the other who spoke on giving the students opportunities in this building before and after school, and how that's gonna help mold them into a better student and a better person beyond our building in the 4 years they spend with us. And I don't have much to say about the medical aspect, although I understand that quite well too. But you know, that's where I struggle with, how to give them as many opportunities as possible, and struggling with the way to pay for it.
All right, anything else?
Dr. Keenwood, I know you pulled that off of the last meeting, the 200, 150,
Right.
knowing that it's only $100 off. Is that, are you still want to stick with your recommendation, or do you?
I think he wants to have a
No,
vote
we'll
on
stick with it, and we'll
Okay.
see what happens.
Okay, Mary Ann, go for the vote, please.
Mr. Jepson?
No.
Dr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
No.
Mr. Gritchen?
No.
Ms. Ruska?
Yes.
What about me?
Oh, this
Right, vote. You
Tied
know.
vote.
No.
That's why she didn't ask you.
Okay. Well, that could be what's going on, so.
Okay, what happens with a tie?
I had the graduation.
It's gotta get the majority.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Do you
All right,
want-
so, do you want to then either go to option C?
I'd like to go to the family cap proposal.
All right,
Do you want to do
For-
the family cap after we establish what they're gonna pay?
for athletics, I think we should do that first.
Because the family cap is gonna be a combination of athletics and stipends, correct?
Yeah,
it'd be-
athletic and non-athletic.
Right. Okay,
I'm
I
sorry.
think that's,
Athletics and activities.
All right, so can
That's
I,
reasonable.
Perhaps we should establish what we're gonna have for athletics, so that we can then have good facts to vote on of family.
all right, can I have a motion for option C?
Resolved that the Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves option C.
Where's option? That's not a family cap.
No.
No.
No,
We're doing, we're setting up the pay first for sport, and then we'll talk about the family cap, because that'll include everything.
I'll just start over.
All right,
Resolved that the Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves the following athletic pay to participate fee schedule for the 2013-2014 school year, option C.
do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ed Jepson. Any discussion on this?
And I think for other people, the option C would be 200 for the first four, which is what it is now.
Yeah, so
Yes.
option C is 200
150
first,
for the
150
second,
second, and 100
And then
for third.
100, right?
Right.
And the lost revenue is estimated about $16,000 if we went to this route, right?
Right, but if we get more kids, we could offset that, so it may be a wash.
That is true.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I think,
Somebody interpret the behavior pattern of dropping for the second sport. Why are we dropping to 150 for the second sport? What is the rationale behind that? What's the facts behind that?
arbitrary,
Oh, okay.
a reducing scale,
Economic theory, anecdotal evidence from the coaches. I
Trickle
guess.
down.
What academic?
Trickle down
We have facts
athletics.
here that show that participation in the second sport is still good. So I'm trying to understand that.
It may help them buy their third sport, or if they have 2 kids, they save
But
$100.
if we're in context with a family, see, that's why you can't do this way. Because if you're gonna talk a family cap and vote on family cap, then you have a conflict there. So this is to be thought out much clearer and better.
Conflict of what?
Well, why drop a second sport if you're then gonna go talk about a family cap?
Because maybe only one child will have an activity and the other child will have 2 sports. So then they would reach their cap,
So say we do a family cap of 500,
okay?
Right.
and we have 2 kids,
Right,
Right.
and one is in chess,
okay,
and then the other guy is in 2 sports.
okay.
Doesn't make the family cap.
No, but if you have 2 kids, my family, they each
I
did a
raised that,
sport.
that's the
Right,
issue I raised.
Right. They
So
don't-
you have to put it in context of the 2 together. Okay? Why,
No, hold on.
the way I would argue is, we're giving up money that we fought because we had people coming in here demanding water polo not be saved. Now, if I was to look at the variable cost, I would argue we should probably cancel both of the 2 cross-country teams because they're more expensive on a variable cost basis. So, I mean.
Well, Gary, it'd have to be the top sports, not.
So I guess what I'm coming back and arguing about is you can't, you have to look at the whole picture, you have to bring everything together before you start going and voting on sports only. You have to bring in all of the pay to participation and assess that.
You disagreed with that when I suggested that during the first vote. It was
No,
told
that was
we
because
shouldn't
we
talk
had-
about the family cap
Well, I was
until after
talking
we
about,
vote.
yeah, right, we're talking about it now.
Well, we're voting on,
but it has
we're
some-
voting on a different alternative of the
Yeah,
first vote.
this is an independent, this can be seen as independent of any cap, this proposal.
So are we
option C.
gonna talk about a family cap then?
That's
Well, that-
gonna be the
I'll bring it up
motion
next.
after
Yes,
this.
Mr.
Okay, then
President,
I
when
would-
I suggested
I-
it, said we should vote on these and then talk about the cap, and you
That's what I
didn't
said.
support me.
No,
on
I
my
said,
idea we
he wanted
shouldn't.
to vote on Keene's option.
We did.
That was C.
Okay,
It
so
lost.
now, that's,
I
so
sug-
now the thing was to then talk about a family cap.
Right, and then I said,
Well, he
I said,
he made the motion.
I said, let's not talk about a family cap until we know what we're gonna pay for athletics.
Right.
Well, you can't. That's not, okay, so then.
So then I made a motion for option C.
Chicken or egg?
Yeah, and with option C, it's so minimal, if we pick up just a few athletes, we'll break even.
All right, any other discussion on option C? Mary Ann?
Dr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Gritchen?
No.
Ms. Ruska?
Yes.
Mr. Jepson?
Yes.
Mr. Cindy?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, now let's talk about a family cap, but the family cap would involve both sports and extracurricular.
Okay, I would need an assessment of what that's gonna
Yeah, I was
impact the
gonna say,
school.
I
We
don't see
don't
how-
know.
I don't see how we can vote on
Right.
that. We have no idea how that will impact revenue at all.
Well, then you
But-
just say, I would like to have some information, please,
But
and
we
maybe
can,
we can
wait,
bring
wait,
it
we
back.
can still vote on that.
We can still
We can
vote.
still vote, this is an equity issue, okay? It's an equity issue, and we can decide what is reasonable as a board for a family in this community to subsidize their athletic and extracurricular
But John,
activities.
you're always one to say before we vote on things, we need all the data in front of us. Now you're asking to vote on something when we don't have data. So how can you rationalize those 2 approaches?
You know, there's a saying, consistency is a hobgoblin of small minds.
All right.
Trying to figure out what the happened. So what do we want to do?
So why doesn't someone make a motion?
Yeah, I mean, this is
Then we
from the
can
gut,
talk about
okay.
Someone make a motion, see if we get
I'm
a
gonna-
second, and then let's discuss.
My motion is, for like, based on this option C, which is.
Look at your, hold on, wait, it's going to be for everything. Look at your email.
Look at-
You have a family cap in there. Page
Right, it's on
99.
the next page.
475, I think.
Page 99.
Right, but that,
It's a little low.
Okay, resolve the Board of Education, Township High School District, Cook County, Illinois, hereby approves the following athletic pay-to-play and extracurricular family cap for the 2013-2014 school year of $500.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second. So we can
Second by Tim
discuss it.
Walsh. All right, let's discuss this. So it is for both athletics and extracurriculars. Okay. Gary, do you have any hobnoble or hobgobble? Or?
Hobgoblin.
I can't vote on something I don't have the full impact, understanding the impact on,
Okay.
okay? We're just shooting arrows in the dark and hoping they don't land on our feet.
Well, I can bring this up. I mean, this pay to participate, comparable conference schools, I mean, no one's close to charging what we charge for participation. A lot of people don't have caps, but the fee per sport is on the order of between $65 and $150. So, and I'm not even sure if we have information on what
So
they charge for clubs.
So if our goal is to make sure that we have students in multiple participation, then we need to change our goal and to restate that to say that we want 100% participation in one activity, we want 50% or we want 70% in students in multiple activities.
I
This
disagree.
is what it's focusing in on.
I disagree. We could say if our goal is to have higher scores, we should cut every class size in half or something. I mean, every issue isn't just, blinders one thing. There's other impacts on it.
Right, and the reason why we implemented a fee was so that we can have, to keep the breadth of these activities so that we can have the high participation rate. If we're gonna start looking to consolidate in revenues, then we should open the door to start looking at cutting again. I mean,
Well, again, is that mutually exclusive from our discussion that we had earlier and later? Our bottom line at the end of the year is gonna be $1.5 million more than we thought it was, when we were put in a position to say, we should raise more revenue and cut more costs. So doesn't that get weighed into the equation now?
Yeah, I think
I mean,
Tim's making a great point. I mean, our financial situation isn't great, but it's improved. And what we did not consider when we put in this $200 thing is, the impact on families. And specifically, I'm not talking about Riverside, I'm talking about Brookfield
there's
and North
people in
Riverside.
Riverside who struggle. It's just
I'm
like
not
you
saying
said.
that. I'm just
Yeah.
saying on average,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying. I'm not disparaging anybody. But that is a reality here. It's a lot of money for some families, and I think it's reasonable that we cap that at a certain amount.
Again, we're looking at the student who's gonna be multiple participation and the revenue associated with that, as opposed to having this district in a strong, or try to get a district in a strong financial position so we can go look to add teachers.
Yeah, I'm basically making an equity argument, okay? That's what it is. How much more should families pay so the kids can participate in the activities here? What is a reasonable number? And I think $500 is reasonable. And that's basically, it is,
But
Gary. The
isn't-
data
isn't-
isn't there,
isn't-
but it's not mutually exclusive from the other goals. When we instituted this $200, we didn't even think about the fact that it may cost some family $1,200.
No, what your equity argument is multiple participation. That's what your equity argument is, multiple participation. Because if you truly looked at an equity argument, you would say the threshold rate should be lower so that we can get more participation on a one activity basis as opposed to those who are 3-4 participation.
No, I'm talking about the individual family paying a tax to this entity to subsidize the activities.
Yeah, but you're talking about a cap, so you're talking about more than one participation.
Right, but 3 years ago.
So the equity would be on that threshold one, the very first one coming in, the first participation coming in the door. So that $200 on first sport should be much lower. That's your equity argument.
No, look, you could argue that, I agree, but I think there, just like any insurance policy, there's maximums. And I think there should be a maximum here of what families need to pay. That's all it is. It's basically that, Gary. And I'm not disagreeing with, you could argue equity, from your standpoint, we should decrease everything, but
I mean,
Well, should-
3 years ago,
But I've got a solid argument. This is a
Right.
solid argument.
right, 3 years ago, we did not have pay-to-play, and students, it was only 3 years ago, could be involved as much as they wanted, and they had fees to pay for books and everything else. 3 years later, today, our students still have fees for registration, plus they have fees for clubs, they have fees for sports. And the economy hasn't improved much. I think if we're looking at partnering with our families, we may want to consider a cap.
Look, Can I ask I don't know if Kevin, you're the right, if you mind if I asked him, we just, by going to a tiered approach with the sports, it just made complicated. One of the reasons you want us to do 200 is it would be easy. Everybody who has to pay writes their check, it's 200. So now you're gonna have to go back and figure out a way to determine whether in the second sport, whether in the third sport. How practical is it? How difficult would it be for us to manage also, besides the tiered approach there, a cap per family, as far as like somebody, the athletic department or your office managing that additional complexity of collecting the fees?
I don't think the tiered approach is gonna be that difficult. I think the family cap will be a little bit more difficult, only because, as I mentioned, you have children with different last names that are from the same family, and I think there are gonna be some people that are gonna fall through the cracks, and that you also have families that live at different addresses.
Right.
So if you have two students that are part of the same family, but they have different last names, live at different addresses, that's not gonna get captured. I mean, it may come to our attention at some point, we may have to reimburse some money, but there are certain things I
So
think.
part of the thing, based on what you're saying, we'd have to be careful about how we decide what a family is too, right? Or is that defined in the school code? I mean, our steps, for instance,
Yeah.
sisters and brothers, part of a family where, maybe there's more kids, or, there's an issue of how you define a family, which I'm sure we could work out. The other question I have, Kevin, is the policy on how we, I don't know, I can't get the internet for some reason, I would have brought it up, but for the fees, there's a provision in there that we waive the fees for people who are eligible for the
Based on the free and reduced lunch.
free and reduced lunch, right?
Right.
But there's also, you have the latitude to
If
waive
there's a
fees
hardship.
for hardship, right? So I just want to make sure it's out there that, and again, whether parents, families would ask or not, if somebody truly had a hardship, they have the ability to go to, I don't know if Pam and you can do it or what the rule is, because I don't have it in front of me, but somebody in the administration,
We
they
have
have a
this-
right to go there and say they have a hardship and have their fees or part of their fees waived or whatever you would agree to.
We have that
right?
flexibility in our policy, and it does happen in minimal occurrences.
Okay.
But if I could weigh in just to the board for, I think you took a big step tonight in that it passed that we put in a tiered approach. And I do want to side with Mr. Gritchen a little bit, that we don't just want to start shooting arrows and not knowing where they're going to land or what. We have absolutely no data except for the four, and it took almost a day to get 4 letters of the alphabet to try to figure out. So, we've already saved some families money by we put a tiered approach in. And just like with the activities, we held them consistent for 2 years. If you really think about it, we've already wavered from that consistency on the athletics because we went 75, 200, now we're going down to a tiered approach. So I would think.
And could I say 2 more things? Number one, we added more activities last year.
We added several activities back, correct?
To encourage more participation. Secondly, I've been asking, or at least the last meeting, for those who are not participating in the school, what are we going to do to try to get those individuals to participate?
Right.
And I'd rather the administration focus in on those to try to get them involved in an activity whatever that activity is, whatever they like. And if that means that the administration has to come to us and say, we're missing out on the artistic community, they want to, whatever, they want to do cartooning or whatever.
Right.
There maybe have to be activity added.
Right.
I'd rather that look than to take away revenue opportunity when we may have to ask for more activities.
John, I second it so we can discuss it, but I feel like we know what the ballpark estimate of the effect is on going to tiered approach, which is going to save money for families whether they have one child or two or three already versus what they had the opportunity for last year. And, I just don't feel like we have the information to have an idea of how much this would affect the families. And, even, I don't know how many families there's 2 kids, but to go from $1,200 if they wanted to play let's just do 2 sports, $800 in 2 sports last year, and we already would cut them to $700, they'd save $100, but then we'd go down to $500, and we don't know the impact, and we're already giving some additional incentive that we didn't have available last year. So, I just don't think and I also, to be perfectly honest with you, based on what you're saying at this point, it doesn't seem worthwhile to me for somebody to spend days going through to figure out how many families there are to do an estimate of what the effect was at this point. It just doesn't seem worth it. We're doing something in the right direction, and see how that works, and we can still consider that if there's some easier way to figure out what the
Yeah, I
effect
think if
is.
it gets voted down, one of the things the administration needs to do is track that for next year, and we'll revisit it again.
But I also think that building on what Gary said too is what are we missing to get this participation up? Is there something we're doing? Is there something that we need? Is there a vein that we're hitting that maybe we discontinued it, or maybe it's something that we need to have that we didn't think about? So I think that's what I would throw back to the administration to be able to do.
Yeah, I think the unknowns are
Okay, given that, any other discussion on this?
a big hurdle.
Mary Ann?
Mr. Walsh?
No.
Mr. Welch?
No.
Mr. Gritchin?
No.
Ms. Ruska?
Yes.
Mr. Jepson?
No.
Dr. Keen?
Yes.
Mr. Cindy?
No.